Because I Could Not Stop for Dead by Emily Dickinson. Emily Elizabeth Dickinson was an American poet who was born on December 10, 1830, in Amherst, Massachusetts. She has been regarded as one of the most important figures in American poetry and also the most original poets of all time. She wrote nearly 1,800 poems during her lifetime, but just 10 poems were published when she was alive. She was an introvert and did not like to mingle with people a lot. She enjoyed spending time on her own and preferred to communicate with people through letters instead of meeting them. Many of her poems were influenced by the metaphysical poets, and her poems reflect her beliefs on death and spirituality. She died at the age of 55 on May 15, 1886. Because I Could Not Stop for Dead is perhaps Dickinson's most famous work. It was written around 1863 and was published after the death of the poet in 1890 in a collection called Poems by Emily Dickinson, Series 1. It has also been printed under the title The Chariot. Through this poem, the poet gives us a clear picture of death. It explores the inevitability of death and shows what happens after a person dies, according to the poet. Dickinson reminds us that we are not in control of our life and that death can knock on our door anytime. So we always have to be prepared for it. In the poem, a woman narrates to us how she goes on a ride in a chariot with a gentleman named Death. As they sat on the chariot or carriage, they passed by several places till finally they reached her grave and then continues their never ending ride toward eternity. This poem shows the poet's perception of death, the afterlife, and the journey it takes to get there. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. In the opening lines, the speaker tells of how she could not stop for death. In other words, she was so busy living her life that she has no time to think of death. Now, normally as human beings, we don't think of death, right? We want to live as long as we can. So the same thing happens to the speaker. So death kindly stops for her. Here, death has been personified. Death has been given a human quality as a young gentleman. So this gentleman dead politely or kindly stops his carriage and takes the woman somewhere. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. The woman climbs into the carriage and observes another passenger there. Other than herself and death, immortality is also present there. So there are three people in the carriage. So in the first stanza, Death represents a kind gentleman whose duty is to pick up passengers toward the journey of death and beyond. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. The ride was so peaceful and relaxing. The speaker says that the driver of the carriage was not in a hurry. He was not in haste. Okay, he was not in a hurry. So they drove slowly towards their destination. The gentleman dead was so polite and perhaps charming that she was willing to put aside her work and her hobbies and go with him. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. The woman mentions several things they saw as they rode on the carriage. Firstly, she mentions passing by a school, and in the playground she sees children playing in the ring during recess. Here, the ring in which the children played have great importance as it represents eternity. The ring is round and it doesn't have an end. We can go on and on and on. So it symbolizes eternity. It gives a clearer picture of where she is going. Secondly, she also mentions passing by fields of gazing grains. Now, these grains seemed to be looking or gazing at her and the carriage she was riding on. They seemed to be waving goodbye to her as she rides towards eternity. They also passed the setting sun. Here, setting sun symbolizes an end to something. And in the case of the woman, it symbolizes an end to her life. It means she is going to die. So the school children, the gazing grains, and the setting sun represents the three stages of the human life. The school children represents childhood, the gazing grains represents adulthood, and the setting sun represents old age or death. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill. For only gossamer, my gown, my tippet, only tulle. The speaker says, the sun has set, which can also mean she is dead and cold. Now the sun represents life, the sun represents warmth or light. Now there is no life, nor warmth or light in her now. And here dews, quivering, chill, all these words suggest the woman is now cold and dead. She also tells us the gown and tippet she was wearing was very thin in texture. It was not thick, it was made of lace, very thin lace. This means she was not prepared for death. It happens at a very unexpected moment, so she was not dressed appropriately. This gives us a very clear idea of how death comes unexpectedly. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling off the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Here the carriage paused or stops in front of a house which looked like a swelling from the ground. Okay, so here the house that is mentioned here is not a house we live in, but it means the grave of the woman. She also gives more description of the house or the grave by saying that the cornice or the design of the roof was scarcely visible, which means it could not be seen clearly. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. She says, it's been centuries since she died, but it feels very short. She can still remember everything she experienced in the process of her death as if it was just yesterday. She ends the poem by telling us which way she was heading to after her death. She says she can see the horse's head going toward eternity. So, through this poem, the poet wants to convey the message how we cannot escape death. It comes to us whether we like it or not at a very unexpected time. So, we always have to be ready and simply accept death as part of life.